we're going to walk through the papers that say lower L reading comprehension at the top. We're not going to walk through this. I had one of my colleagues who was an upper L teacher that had no Montessori, had surgery after having breast cancer in her second year of teaching at the school, and just all kinds of things going on. And we were responsible for Common Core our second year, essentially, of the school's existence. And I showed her this, and she started to cry. These are all of the language standards on one page. Now, there's not a lot of detail there, but when you think about what I've told you about who was in my class and what we were responsible for, this helped her to relax. It helped her to say, okay, I can have a sense of this. This isn't some, 80-page document that I'm never going to be able to wrap my head around. And I want you to understand that's all this is for. This is just to help you to wrap your head around, in the cases of everyone in this room, where your children need to get to, and then where they're going to have to go after that. So for a lot of yours, this is so that you kind of understand what they're going to have to be doing by the time they get to 5th and 6th grade. It's not things that you're going to be responsible for, so don't be concerned. The only explanation I'm going to give you right now is down at the bottom where it says read and comprehend text at your own level, 2 to 3 year bands, and it says scholastic red bins. That was something our school had, which it was. Oh, okay. And are they in red bins? Oh, okay. Well, cool. Then it applies. And nobody knew what the letters association was, and they had to keep looking it up in the orange book that you never knew where it was, or it was in the library because there was a bunch of them there, and so it's right there. So if you wonder what an N through P book is, you're going to know it's kind of a 3rd grade level, but it's a 2nd to 3rd grade level band. So that's all that this is to just kind of help you to visualize the whole thing for 6 whole years and kind of kindy on one page. So that's all that's for. Now, this is to help you see how a whole lot of reading comprehension standards can be practiced, evaluated, and tracked at one time. So what has happened is that a group has read a common story. How many of you at least kind of think you know the gingerbread man story? Okay, he's a cookie and then he jumps out. Okay, all right, so we're going to practice this for the gingerbread man. Now I'm going to talk you through this tracking page first so that you'll understand how I've set this up before I ever sit down with my children. This is a reading group. Now it may be an established reading group, so maybe it's my Oaks and I've got their names printed in there, and they're who I sit with every time this time of week, but I've got them together, and then the shading is going to help me know which questions I'm going to be going through and what I'm going to be tracking on. Because notice that if it's shaded, it's questions for informational text. Do you see that? So if we are reading about the gingerbread man, am I going to be asking questions about the use and asking them to use and explain the graphics? No, we don't talk about graphics, we talk about illustrations here. Now, if we were doing an informational text, would I ask them to retell or tell the lesson or the moral of the story? No. Now, the first few times you work with this, you're going to feel a little bit lost, and that's okay, because you're going to do this every week. You're going to do it every week. And it's not going to be perfect. It's not like a score on a math fact quiz. And everybody take a breath. None of your reading record keeping is. It's an approximation. It's a temporary reflection of what's going to help you do the next step and give some feedback to mom and anybody else you're responsible for. It's not 98 facts done in 4 minutes, okay? So let it go and know that you're going to be better off than if you had not done this record keeping. So we've all read The Gingerbread Man. Maybe we've read it to ourselves and we've read it aloud, and now we're going to talk about it together. So which of the other pages am I going to have up beside me in case I don't remember all the questions, so I'm not too far into the year? What's it say at the top? Literature or informational? Literature. The Gingerbread Man is literature. It's not informational text. So I'm going to ask, what happened at the beginning of the story? Now, maybe I have a little child who will sit there and tell me the entire story if I don't stop her. And so I'm going to set a few ground rules. And I'm not misogynistic or the opposite of that for guys, but I've been teaching for a long time, and there are certainly gender tendencies, and they do inform my speech. So I hope that I don't offend anybody in the way that I say that. It's just kind of been my typical experience. So I'm going to set some ground rules. The first one is, and it's more a procedure, but it's we want everyone to participate. So particularly if you've answered more than what I said, I may stop you. And I apologize ahead for interrupting you, but because we're in a discussion with all these children, I need to make sure everybody has a turn. So please forgive me ahead of time if I interrupt you, because those children you probably will need to interrupt. And if you set that as the expectation, it's usually not too big of a deal. So I want you to look at the top above number 1. If you need to back up to the questions in parentheses, it's a signal that concept is probably a represent. So if you look down at number 2, what is the theme or a theme of this story? Well, if they're just all over the place, then you're going to have to back up and give a lesson on what is a theme. That is assumed. It is assumed in this that you've presented all these concepts. It will not be assumed in your lesson plans. Teaching what a theme is will be in your lesson plans, but by the time that you're doing this in this way, it's assumed. But could you do these other questions from the first book that you read together? Absolutely. A lot of it's just kind of common sense things. It doesn't require any literature vocabulary to speak of. So what happened at the beginning of the story? Yes. Okay, so the old man and the old lady were lonely. That's a really important part of the story that we knew at the beginning, because it kind of sets us up for what's going to happen next, doesn't it? Yes. Now, what would I mark? You're going to be Rose. What would I mark for Rose on number 1? Ask and answer questions about key details: who, where, when. Did she demonstrate that? Just in what she said, she did, didn't she? Now, would it be a mastery? Probably not. Would it be at least an improving? Yes. Now, improving is not a judgment call so much as somebody's cruising, okay? They may not have it all down, and I may not be sure they have it all down. Look at the bottom, I'm sorry, of the tracking paper. Presented means that all that you know is you presented it to them. So you've explained to them how to answer this question at some time in the past, so you probably wouldn't put that down. Sorry, an L is for that you've given the lesson. A P is practicing. So that means they're giving it something. They've made an answer. They may be completely off the chart, but they're at least putting some attention to it. They're trying. In other words, improving means that they've given you some on-track information. For sure. So I would definitely put an I there if I'm going to use that coding, and I'm going to show you a different coding in a minute. And maybe if that's not the first question she's answered while I'm using this form, I may even put an M. Maybe I can even remember her talking about these different stories, and I know she's got this down. So then I'm going to put an M up in that column by number 1. Now I'm going to show you a different coding that's really nice, that makes it easier for you to up their levels. It's harder to explain. I taught upper L, but almost all of the standard stuff for the first year and a half was stuff that I made. And so I didn't even teach this to lower L. I just made it for them, and somebody else taught it to them. So that's why I didn't teach this, because they weren't Montessori people. If they were all Montessori, they would have known it anyway. This is, I've given them the lesson. This is practicing, typically. This is improving, sometimes almost got it, okay? This is mastered. Okay, so do you see how that's a cool one to use? And this is not for one story, friends. This is for one group. You might use this for 4 stories, okay? This can be an ongoing record. And then guess what? Every single one of these things in this column is going to look exactly like this in MRX. So this is one of the few things where you're going to record it on paper, but look how much you're going to record. Look how much you're going to record for a whole bunch of children, so then when you sit in front of MRX, it's going to be a breeze to go through and get those things done. So if you decide to use the triangle, you would write a little slash by the L. So in fact, let me just give you a key up here. So L is the slash, P is the angle, I is the complete triangle, and mastered is a filled in triangle. Okay. Okay, so now maybe we don't have a whole lot of time. I realized I was running a little bit behind, so maybe I'm not going to ask more detail on that one. Maybe I just need kind of a quick overview. So And I'm really curious. We taught theme 2 weeks ago, and we talked about it next week. I want to see whether or not people know what's going on. What is the theme or a theme of this story? That's okay. So now, if I get that,
is
what?
Right? Yeah.
No, you're just further down the road. That's okay.
The theme is vanity.
Vanity, okay. Now, is this a first grader? Probably not. So, some of your first graders. So, what if I get what I got at the beginning of that? What do? What was the main idea in this story? So see, I'm just going to kind of, please summarize the story. So do you see how we're going to do related things? Does that mean that I have mixed up the theme with the main idea? No. It means I'm going to make sure that I've got something to get the beginnings of a read on this. Now, some of you may think, oh, well, this sure seems complicated. If you just sit and practice it once or twice with a colleague, I don't think you'll find that it is. And I didn't even think people needed this. I just gave them this. And they said, well, what do I say? So that's why I made this. But I think if you practice with this, you won't have very much of a problem. And I know that there's some of you who would probably like more detail, and you want to know exactly who knows what a plot is and from whose point of view it is, and why aren't I writing their responses on here? You don't need that. You really don't. And for any of you who tried to record keep last year, isn't this going to be a whole lot more of good quality information than what you ended up with at the end of the year? I mean, if it's not, then do what you did before. You know, don't substitute this in. But I found it to be a really accessible way to get a lot of that information at a reasonable level of expectation. So looking over mostly the tracker, are there any questions that you have? If you're looking at it without the questions beside you, it may not make as much sense, but especially if you're not familiar with your standards, but anything there. Okay? All right, let me give you that. Now, did I give you an upper L? Oh, I'm sorry. Did anybody else get an upper L tracking sheet? If it says, does yours say upper? Okay, I thought I gave everybody a lower, but okay. All right. So one of the things that I told you was that I was going to talk about how you're going to go all the way from the lesson plan that's provided for you to the content the assessment being tracked in MRX. And I am going to walk you through that. That's one reason that we did this, because if you look at that tracker, that's the way that your lesson list is going to tend to look in MRX. I'm going to abbreviate things if I will make it actually easier for you. It's particularly going to be true on things like this, because these are the kinds of lessons that you should be looking at over and over and over and over and over again. You will have even had them explained by me, in your case in person, sometimes in a video. Now, if it's a zoology lesson, every word is probably going to be written out, especially if there's any chance for confusion, because that's not the kind of thing you're going to be using over and over and over again. I want you to be able to use MRX in as small a device as you want to pretty easily. So if I try to write long lesson names for things, it's not going to work very well for you. But the other thing is, any of the trackers that I give you for you to use or for the children to use will match exactly. And I think that's one of the places where you're going to find it's going to be much easier for you. So I'm going to walk you through that one, and then I'm going to walk you through a grammar example, a reading example, and a math example. So for this example that I got, remember how we looked in the lesson plans and it just said, this group is reading and they're on read aloud this week. I'm not going to fill in your books for you. You know, that's completely school-based. So you're going to be making decisions what that Oaks group is going to be reading. You're going to be making decisions whether the children are reading in a small group or just with the reading specialist that comes in for a push-in with them. You know, those are all independent decisions that you're going to make. Things like going through all of those literature concepts will be in your lesson plans. So theme, plot, a sign to put on your shelf to remind the children what some of these things are. Those things will all be in your lesson plan. So that's where you'll start, and then modifying them however you choose. Then you're going to implement them, again, modified to whatever degree that you choose, and on your plan will be entering so much information into MRX. And Nicole and I have talked about this. I think it's appropriate to require that of you to the degree that I'm going to suggest. So after every group lesson, you enter things into MRX. Now at the very beginning, some of you may need to do some paperwork occasionally for group math lessons, because you might have more of a variation where people are than you're going to typically have in a lesson like this. But other than that, I would suggest that it's going to be important. Now, are you going to, right after the lesson, transfer everything from this paper? No. That would be end of the day record keeping, and I do mean end of the day or the next morning before. It would certainly be up to you where between the times with the children you do it, but don't wait until the weekend. Please don't wait until the weekend. Please do your beginning or end of the day record keeping, and I promise you it will be much better, and it will not take very much time if you do it the way that I show you with these abbreviated lesson lists that we're going to do, and you'll have an amazing report that will be populated by the information by doing that. Now, when do you do that? You do that with journals in front of you, because that's where these tracking pages go. They are pasted in the children's journals. Now, I don't know if you're using journals, so whatever the children have that's their thing, it's not a loose piece of paper, it's a folder or a notebook or something that you folded and made into a journal, or it's an actual bound journal. That's where these kinds of record keeping things go. And so you and or your assistant, probably in your case you, would then be using those journals. This is part of your beginning or end of the day record keeping. And you're going to do a set amount of time. You're not going to do a set amount of journals. You're going to do 10 minutes. You're going to see however many journals you can get done, and you're going to make sure you're rotating through all of your students. And then you're going to let it go. Okay? Because you're going to get so much done if you will just do the habit. It's never done. If you have not gotten that message, take this, the greatest blessing I can give you as an educator, and learn it today. It's never done. So you've got to set up habits that are going to get the most important things done. Okay? Now,